Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Greeks in our continuing study of the history of civilization. We left off with the migrations that had taken place around 1200 BC, where we have peoples coming down into the Greek peninsula from the north. That sets off a chain reaction of migrations, and we can even call them invasions, into the island of Crete. We have the Trojan War, which certainly was popularized by Homer, but actually took place. We have other peoples moving across the Anatolia and into the Hittite Empire, which now crumbles and falls. We have the Sea Peoples that make a bid for capturing Egypt, and they fight against Ramses III, but he manages to hold them off. This is going to now introduce what we call the Greek Dark Ages. It's not just in Greek, but we're looking at Greece right now. From 1200 to 800 BC, we actually have a period where people forget how to write. It's a return to a largely non-literate age, at least in the Greek peninsula. And cities that were there suddenly aren't there anymore. Suddenly they're in ruins, and suddenly they're even abandoned. And scholars are still wondering what took place here. If you had asked the Greeks of a later era what happened here, they referred to the Dorian invasion, a group known as the Dorians that come down into the southern part of the Peloponnesus, that southern part of Greece, and are going to take over. And they're initially not a literary people. Now we're going to see eventually now the rise of the city-states, and this is after the 800 BC period, where we have, and there's a number of them. I'm only going to highlight three of them: Athens and Sparta, and later on Thebes. And these are going to be the three major cities. There'll be many more. We're going to have a host of city-states, and yet at times they will ally themselves with others. And Athens and Sparta are especially going to be two of the power brokers, but Thebes will be up and coming soon after. Now to the north, today we think of this as northern Greece, but they didn't think of this as Greece. They described this as Macedonia. That was to the north, and of course Macedonia, especially in a few classes, is going to be very significant to us when we get to Alexander the Great, but that's not yet. We also have Thrace to the east of Macedonia, still in Europe, still on the west side of the Bosphorus, but also not considered Greek by the Greeks. Now, what is considered at least a Greek people, and these are all speaking languages that are very similar. We have Ionia in the east, on the east side of the Aegean Sea, in western Anatolia. These are Greek-speaking people, and these are people that have affinity with the Greeks, with Athens and Sparta and so on. Now let's talk a bit about Athens. Athens today is a huge city, the largest city in Greece. And you go to almost anywhere in Athens, and you look to the highest point, and you're going to see the Acropolis. The Acropolis in the distance you're going to see, and a temple to Athena, which gives the city its names. Is named Athens after Athena. And you climb up the Acropolis. It's quite a climb, and you get up there, and you see the Parthenon. The Parthenon, named after, of course, the word Parthenon means the place of the Virgin, and so this is the named for Athena, the place of the Virgin goddess Athena. It was in that day a glorious temple. Of course, the whole top of the mountain is a temple assembly, and various buildings surround it until you get to actually the Parthenon, where the Virgin Goddess, her statue, would be found. As you stand from the atop the Acropolis by the Parthenon, you can look to the south and you can see the Aegean Sea. And today this is just solid city all the way to the sea because the city has gotten so big. But in that day that wasn't the case. Athens was the area around the Acropolis, and about 17 miles or so to the south. I don't know if it was quite that far. But you have what today is called the port of Piraeus. But back then it had that name too. But it was a separate city connected by a road. And so the Greeks, and especially the Athenians, are going to be a seagoing people, even though their city's not right on the ocean. Is connected to a port, and they are going to build another thalassocracy. Do you remember how we described that term with the Minoans? But now the Greeks also are going to be a seagoing people, and they will have Greek colonies all around the Mediterranean. One of the values of the Greeks was the value, and I say Greeks, should say the Athenians, was the value of freedom as a national value. When we talk about freedom, we can talk about several different things. There's national freedom, of the freedom of a nation to do what that nation wants to do. There's political freedom, where you can vote and you can have a say in your government. And also there's personal freedom, where you can do what you like. And you say, gee, I'd like to, instead of being a baker, I want to go and be a firefighter. And as long as you can qualify, you can go do that. Here in America, where I live, all three of these are highly valued. These are valued, both national and political and personal freedom. That isn't the case in all civilizations. For example, we go down to Egypt, and they're not going to have any political freedom. And what's more, they're not going to want it. It reminds me of an Egyptian fellow one time told me, John, we're Egyptians. We're the land of the pharaohs. We want somebody to beat us and then feed us. And my jaw dropped. I'd never heard anything like that. But that's because the people there, at least according to him, did not value personal. They valued personal freedom, not political freedom. Now, I think that has changed somewhat in Egypt. But he was describing Egypt from of old, and political freedom wasn't something they had. They were the land of the pharaohs, and the pharaoh would decide what to do. Personal freedom, not so much. And in Athens, we're going to see a high level of both national and political. And I think also, at least among the free, remember, this is a land that holds slaves, so they're not holding personal freedom for slaves, but among the free and the landowners, personal freedom as well. And this will be in Athens, all three of these will be a value which has not been seen in that level up to this point, I would suggest, in any ancient culture, that Athens will be the first to exhibit these three areas, national and political and personal freedom, as a value of their people. Now, that asks the question, and we've already answered it, I think. Is freedom a universal value? And the answer is no. And we need to realize that back then and today, freedom is not a universal value. Now, I live in a country, and I've been raised up in a culture where it is considered a high value. But I should recognize that that's not worldwide. Roofus Fears, I love his lectures on this subject. He used to be professor of history at University of Oklahoma. He said the American view of freedom has been shaped by 5 currents. And he lists the Old Testament, the Athenian democracy, which we're talking about now, the Roman Republic, and we'll get to that in a bit, in a few lectures, by Christianity, and finally by Great Britain. And all of these have combined together to impact the way Americans view freedom. Now, let's get back to Greece. We have Solon the Lawgiver. And he's called that because he's going to give a series of laws, but you have to understand the context from which he's coming. Previously, there had been a lawgiver by the name of Draco, and we use still to this day, we refer to draconian laws or draconian measures, and we mean by that laws that are very harsh, because the laws of Draco had a tendency to be very harsh with regard to their penalties. That is, the penalty for murder was death, but the law for, and I'm just going to make this up, spitting on the sidewalk might also be murder. In other words, this very harsh penalty would be for a very terrible crime, but also for a sort of moderate crime. And they asked Draco, why is that? And he said, well, I can't punish you any worse by putting you to death, but actually you ought to be punished worse for an even worse crime. But all the crimes were worthy of death in his opinion. And so Solon, he was an Athenian merchant traveler, and he's going to do some travels both earlier but especially later on, we're going to see. And he writes a series of laws for Athens that are going to replace the laws of Draco, and they are considered fair and they are considered balanced. And because, remember, Athens at this time, its leadership is sort of that democratic ideal where everybody's voting on everything, and that means if you can get everybody to agree with you next week, you can sort of push aside the law that you didn't like, and that way you can break it and then repass it again later on. And Solon writes the laws for Athens, and he makes it part of that no one can change the law for 10 years. Actually, nobody can change the law for Solon, and then he's going to leave town for 10 years. So the one that can change the law will be gone, and the law is going to be, can I say it this way? It will be set in stone. It will become semi-permanent. And then he leaves town and he travels. Now there's a story about how he comes to visit King Croesus, the king of Lydia, with his capital at Sardis. And Croesus was considered the wealthiest man in all the world. And so Croesus asks he's showing Solon around his palace and all his possessions, and he asks him, Solon, who is the most happy man you have ever known, thinking, look at all the things that I have, certainly it's me. And Solon mentions somebody who lived a quiet life and received esteem. It was a Greek, and died with great honor. And Croesus says, well, who do you think was the second happiest? and Solon mentions somebody else who I seem to recall it was something in the order of two brothers who had lived and then died in service of their country. And Solon, Croesus said, well, what about me? Aren't I happy? And Solon replies to him, count no man happy until he dies. Well, as it turns out, Croesus, he ends up going to war with a new up-and-coming king that we've already talked about when we talked about the Persian Empire, with Cyrus the Great. And apparently Cyrus had remember, the Persians for a time, the Medes and the Persians had formed an alliance with Babylon, and so, but then had turned against Babylon after Nebuchadnezzar died, and there had been sort of some harsh things between Babylon and Cyrus. And Croesus, meanwhile, he has a new alliance with Babylon, and he goes to the oracle, and he says to the oracle, "Should I go to war with Persia?" And the oracle, oracles, they want to cover their bets, so sometimes they speak in sort of vague terms. And the oracle says to him, "If you go to war, a great kingdom will fall." Which sounds, at least Croesus took it and meant, well, that means I'll win. Of course, the oracle didn't say which kingdom would fall. And so, taking this plan and advice, if you go to war against Persia, a great kingdom will fall. Croesus goes to war against Cyrus, and he loses the battle, and he goes home to Sardis. It's getting toward the end of the year. The snow's getting ready to fall, and you only go to war in the summertime. But Cyrus had never read those rules, and so Cyrus actually follows Croesus to Sardis, and that's okay because Croesus goes up. Sardis is built around a narrow ridge, and you're looking at the top of the ridge. And at the top of the ridge, you can still see some of the fortifications. And there was a big fortress up at the top of the ridge. And so Croesus went to the top of the fortress, knowing that Cyrus, he can't stay there for long because eventually he's going to run out of food and things like that. And he's nice and safe up atop his fortress, and Cyrus is down below. And one day, Cyrus is looking up at Croesus in his fortress, and things are getting sort of boring. And there's a soldier up on the wall who, in his boredom, he sort of starts to fall asleep, and his helmet falls off. And his helmet comes rattling down the cliff, down to the gully below. And the soldier sort of looks back and forth to see if anyone's looking, and then he crawls over, he climbs over the wall, and he proceeds to make his way down the cliff, down a very narrow path, but it's a path that you couldn't see from the bottom. And he gets his helmet and he climbs back up and goes back on the wall, takes his place, and promptly goes to sleep again. And meanwhile, Cyrus is thinking, wait a minute, if he climbed down that easily and then back up, then my soldiers tonight can take that same route, and they do so while everyone is sleeping. And they capture the city of Sardis, and they capture Croesus. Now, let me mention that in the Bible, when we get to Revelation chapter 3, Jesus is writing 7 letters to 7 churches, and one of those churches is the church at Sardis. And to the church at Sardis, he says to them, "Wake up! Wake up! You are spiritually falling asleep." And what he's doing, he's borrowing from the story of Sardis, a city that had fallen because someone had fallen asleep. Well, Croesus is taken, and they're going to put him to death. They're going to put him on a funeral pyre and burn him alive. And they're getting all the wood and the fire together. And Croesus is up there, and he says, "Boy, was Solon right." Remember, Solon said, "Count no one happy until he die," because you don't know how the end is going to be. And boy, my end wasn't very happy, and Solon was right. And Cyrus is there, and Cyrus says, and this is the way the story goes, Cyrus says, "What did he say?" I can't speak his language, and someone translates it, and he says, well, bring him down here. What's the story that you're talking about? And he tells him a story about how Solon had given him that advice that don't count anyone happy till he die, and he had thought he was going to win, and it was sort of arrogant on his behalf. And Cyrus says to him, well, that's good advice. Sounds like you've learned something. I could use someone to advise me who has learned those kinds of lessons. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to burn you at the stake. From now on, you're going to work for me, and you'll be my advisor. And so he brings him down off the pyre. And they look out over the city where Cyrus's soldiers are looting, and Cyrus says, "See, they're looting your city." And Croesus says, "Oh no, that's your city now because you've captured it. They're looting your city." And Cyrus thinks about that. Gee, I don't know if I want them looting my city. Maybe we'll call a halt to that. And so what Croesus had demonstrated is what the Greeks had a word for this. They called it hubris. That is outrageous arrogance. And many a Greek story is going to be spoken about the negative qualities of such arrogance, of such self-confidence that passes the realm of self-confidence, and it becomes just over the top. Now, the kingdom of Cyrus, beginning with Cyrus himself, now stretches from India all the way to the Aegean, and eventually it's going to run into conflict with the Greeks, not in the days of Cyrus, but instead in the days of Darius. We're going to have Darius the Great, and of course, when he comes to the throne, there's the Athenian. There's a revolt in the Ionian provinces, those provinces on the west side of Anatolia, and Athens actually supports that revolt. And so Darius comes, he subjugates Thrace and Macedon. Remember, we talked in a past lecture about how he tries to invade Scythia, going north around the around the Black Sea. But now we want to focus on how he invades Greece. And we've already talked about that, so I'm not going to go into great detail. But there at the Battle of Marathon, he faces the Greeks and loses the battle. Now, he's not there personally. This is his forces that he sent. He's considering this relatively minor as things go. But in that battle, remember we talked about how the Greeks, they placed their heavy forces on either side that push past and then envelop. They managed to envelop now the Persian force in that envelopment, and as a result, the casualties, according to the Greeks that tell the story, Herodotus tells the story, the Athenians lose 192 men, and the Persian dead are counted in the realm of 6,400. So that the Persians have a high degree of casualties. Now that didn't hardly put a dent in the Persian forces. There were so many more, but it was a defeat, and so the forces of Persia go back now for a time. But they will come back in the days of Xerxes, and he comes to the throne. There's an argument over succession, but he finally wins out because he's actually got an older brother. But he says, "Look, that older brother was born before Dad became king, and so I'm the rightful, royal prince." And he does now become king. He puts down rebellions in Egypt and Babylon, and now he invades Greece. Again, we talked about how he built a land bridge across the Hellespont. And when a storm came out, he ordered the sea to be whipped. Now, this is the Greeks tells the story. There's a little bit of propaganda there. But we don't have Xerxes' version of the story. He doesn't want to talk about it. Because remember, you don't talk about your defeats, and this will be a Persian defeat, ultimately. And so Xerxes, the army of Xerxes, crosses the Hellespont up through Thrace, across Macedonia, and then coming down into Greece. And it's as we come to this place called Thermopylae that we find the first real encounter with the Greeks. At the Battle of Thermopylae, remember you have Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, but they're not the only ones there. There are Thessalians and there are Athenians that have also gathered, and they're holding out until against the Persians because of the very narrow pass. And the recognized leader of the group is Leonidas, the Spartan general/king, because the Spartans would always have two kings, one to go to war, one to stay at home. He's the going at war king, so we're going to call him the general. And they're holding out in this narrow pass. Today it's not quite so narrow. It's silted up a bit, but it's you can still see the steep mountains. And they're holding out in the pass until a renegade Greek shows the Persians a hidden path around the pass, and they come up and they're going to surround the Greek forces, and Leonidas is going to send all of his forces home, except for his 300, and also some Thessalians. They were afraid they might desert and go to the Persians, and so the last stand is made. And really, this is the first time we read of a last stand being celebrated, where that it's the glorious defeat that is celebrated. The Persians move on to Athens. They destroy Athens, but by this time the citizens of Athens have largely moved down to the coast of Perea. That's where the harbor is, and then across to the island of Salamis. And the Greeks, the Athenians especially, are trusting in what they call their wooden walls, their ships. And the Persians, though, have assembled a navy made up of Egyptians and Phoenicians and other groups, Ionians, and this famous battle at Salamis is fought. And you can go to Salamis today. Today it's all port area. You can see the harbor and the ships that are all lined up even today. And imagine the ancient ships that are there as the Persian navy is tricked into entering that narrow harbor, just like they had entered the narrow strait, the narrows at Thermopylae. Here they're doing the same thing by water. And Xerxes is watching the battle from a nearby mountaintop, and he watches his navy defeated by the Athenian navy. So here's the first really famous ocean-going battle, the Battle of Salamis. And the Greeks win the battle. That doesn't mean the entire Persian navy is destroyed, but it suffered a defeat. And Cyrus turns around and goes home, leaving his I think it was his son-in-law, Mardonius. And his son-in-law fights the Greeks, and there's Spartans, but there's also Athenians. It's a united force of Greeks at the Battle of Plataea the following year. And this time it's a major Greek victory, and the Persians leave, and they won't be back. And this ushers in now what we call the Age of Pericles. Pericles himself is a statesman. He's a speaker within the Athenian assembly, and one of his agendas, one of the things that we see here, is political equality between the rich and the poor, where anyone can come in to the assembly. Remember, all Greeks were citizens as long as you were not a slave. So you did have second-class people, a large number of slaves, but political equality between the rich and the poor. And we're just talking about men. Women don't come into the assembly. This is sort of a men-only club. And during his time, instead of electing people to office, they're going to take political offices by the casting of lots. What that will do, where instead of a rich person being able to purchase the election by giving bribes to a whole bunch of people, it's going to be more by chance where someone will take office. And Athens during this time, remember you had the Persian wars where Persia had invaded, and because of that, Athens now heads up a defensive league with its treasury based at Delos, so it becomes known as the Delian League, and they collect funds for their mutual defense. We might need to build another navy or build up other things, but this treasury is being used primarily by Athens to build up Athens. It's supposed to be for everyone's defense, but instead it's building up what amounts to an Athenian Empire. And this Athenian Empire will soon come into conflict with some of the other Greek states, particularly with Sparta. In discussing this empire, Pericles says, "Nor is it any longer possible for you to give up this empire." He's speaking to his fellow Athenians. "Your empire is now like a tyranny. It may have been wrong to take it. It's certainly dangerous to let it go." They were on a collision course with their neighbors, the Spartans. And so we have Athens and Sparta, and when they go to war, this will be the Peloponnesian War. The war of remember the Pelopons is that area, that southern area of the peninsula, the Peloponnesus, the southern area of Greece, that's connected by that narrow isthmus of Corinth. But we'll talk about this war next time.